like your golf, don't you?
Love me golf.
Love your golf. Yesterday, it was rather interesting listening to that Senate hearing, which happened late in the afternoon. There's so many revelations emerging from documents accompanying that subcommittee hearing in Washington, investigating the framework of the merger agreement that ended the legal battle between the PGA Tour and the breakaway Saudi-funded LIV circuit. Russ Hargreaves, talkSPORT's golf correspondent, is on the line now. Hi, Russ. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, always a pleasure, guys. Hiya.
Hi, Russ.
Listen, there were some seriously odd things that came out of this particular hearing. Including a statement from one of the senators who basically said it was a fight for the soul of golf against what he called a regime that he wasn't too happy about dealing with. Is there a chance that the Senate could block this merger?
There is a chance, absolutely. So you can look at it, Sam, two ways, can't you? The way that you've just outlined, and there's a very strong feeling in America and among certain members of that Senate subcommittee to say that Saudi Arabia, there are very clear links, aren't there, between the Saudi regime, or certainly Saudi Arabia as an entity, and 9/11. And the bad blood, the animosity, everything that's happened since 9/11 there still runs very, very deep. And obviously, whenever LIV has played in America, massive protests from huge members of survivors, from victims' funds, you name it. With that in mind, that's one element. And the other is just the concept of actually effectively selling a crown jewel of American sport, the PGA Tour, selling its soul pretty much, about $1 billion plus investment to a foreign regime, any foreign regime, let alone the fact it's Saudi Arabia. That's the one side. But quickly, the other is you look at the bottomless pit of money that LIV and the PIF have been investing. If this continued, plus the ongoing court case between the two that was costing about £100 million, as we understand it, a year, at some point, the PGA Tour's coffers were going to run dry. You've got the elevated events that they've tried to put in to try and give more money to their players to stave off LIV. Ultimately, at some point, they wouldn't be able to compete the PGA Tour. They'd either fold or lose more stars. I think they knew the writing was on the wall. And their argument is, if we didn't do this, it would all collapse anyway. And it's better to do this and this deal than the other half.
Well, this is basically what they said yesterday, didn't they? So they got 5 years left. If they didn't do the deal, then they would end up going out of business. What about the players that were involved in some of these negotiations without their knowledge? Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy are part of the document suggesting that they will be given LIV Golf franchises as part of the proposed.
What would that mean in layman's terms?
Well, you explain it to us. What does that mean? Because for those people who don't watch the LIV Golf, who don't understand how it works, the idea of those two having a franchise, just explain what that would mean. And also then tell us whether or not they knew anything about it, because they've been two of the most vocal critics.
Well, Rory, of course, said he felt like the sacrificial lamb when all of this broke, because he'd been up there, hadn't he, at various media conferences repeatedly on the PGA Tour, defending them and saying, I hate LIV. I still hate LIV, notably not the PIF, but LIV as an entity. And Tiger also, another major mouthpiece pro the PGA Tour as well, even though he can't play much these days. There was the big players meeting midway through the season prior, where of course they effectively lobbied and got a huge number of players to come together and come up with a new plan for the PGA Tour, rightly or wrongly, moving forward. So yeah, there's that side of it. But what LIV wanted, and it won't happen, by the way, these were mooted possibilities of what could happen as a result of the merger. It ain't going to happen, is that Rory and Tiger would each have a LIV Golf team of their own, and they'd have to commit to a minimum of 10 LIV Golf events for next season. Rory has already said he hates the thing. Tiger's basically, very crook, to put it mildly, not Alex Crook, but crook in terms of his injuries. So I don't see how this would honestly have happened, but the idea was get them out, get the two biggest hitters across to LIV, and then LIV's kind of authenticity, its credibility would have been raised massively by having the absolute two global megastars as part of the brand. For all the reasons I've outlined and more, that won't happen. It's one of 6 or 7 things suggested that came out in the subcommittee hearing that are not going to progress forward beyond the discussion phase.
I wonder how Henrik Stenson is feeling, Russ, about this merger, because, of course, he was stripped of the Ryder Cup captaincy for Europe when he moved over to LIV. He's within his rights and he to knock on the doors now and say, well, I'll have that back, thank you very much.
Yeah, Luke Donald, any chance?
I think Luke might be a better captain personally anyway, but that's just my gut reaction, and that's not the key point here, is it, Alex? I completely agree with you. Ultimately, what the European and DP World Tour have said, and obviously they're kind of still caught in the middle of this, they're part of the New Deal, but are they the squeeze middle and still ultimately the satellite tour of the PGA Tour, and maybe with the LIV merger as well? Maybe we'll watch that closely. I think all that can really be said is, when the rules were made clear, and as the rules were at the time, Henrik Stenson and many others, Ian Paul Poulter, Paul Casey, I'll list them all, Lee Westwood, they chose to go. And at that point, they made their decision. They turned their back on the DP World Tour. They were, of course, fined. There was various litigation aspects to that. And even though things have changed, there is more of a concurrence now to move forward. Ultimately, there's no specific bespoke deal done to have them back, and they still did what they did. And I think that's the argument to say that they don't probably come back in time for this Ryder Cup. And logistically, to rechange captains and go back to Henrik now, when Luke's done so much work to try and get the team ready and fit and firing for talkSPORT 2 in Rome in September, I just can't see that working.
Talk to me about one of the other big revelations that came out yesterday, which was the PIF governor Yasir Al-Ramayan, who is also the chairman of Newcastle United. One of the conditions about the merger, or what was proposed by Amanda Staveley, actually, who was drafted in to head up these negotiations, was for possible membership of the Augusta National Golf Club, which stages the Masters, and the St Andrews Royal Ancient, and becoming basically the de facto head of all golf across the world.
So Yasir Al-Ramayan would become the chairman of the new merged entity. So Jay Monahan, who's been off sick and is now back, the PGA Tour commissioner, would remain CEO of the new entity. Al-Ramayan would be chair, and as you say, there would be an array of gorgeous perks. So yeah, being a member of the Augusta National and of the RNA, and therefore St Andrews, would be just a couple of the very juicy things that I suspect will happen. They're not on the list of those that have been cancelled. I mean, there's going to be no LIV shifting to the autumn. There'll be no Rory and Tiger, no World Golf Series event, no Saudi sponsorship of designated PGA Tour events. There's a fair few that we know have been shelved, but Al-Ramayan, as I understand it, that could easily happen, as could, by the way, Greg Norman going. Obviously, the mouthpiece of LIV. Boy, has he been, very ballsy, very gutsy, and really kind of stuck it to the PGA Tour. They didn't like that. Same as well for the PR agency Performance 54 that did the same. One of the PGA Tour stipulations for this is that people like that have been a bit overly angsty in their view, rightly or wrongly, get cut and have no role to play moving forward.
Not that they'll mind, Ross, because they've already been weighed in anyway. Haven't they? I mean, Greg Norman's probably been given to do what he's already done. The fact he's been released now with a PR company, it's like, oh, thanks for your time, no problem. Thanks for all that money. Yeah, nice to see you.
Yeah, I know what you mean, Danny. I mean, Greg's still saying, as far as he understands it, LIV will exist next year. And this is another point, isn't it, that we should really quickly consider. Will LIV actually be LIV Golf and the entity we know it for a third year in 2024? If the deal's done, as I understand it, they might actually incorporate some of LIV, the team aspect, one or two of the other ideas, almost into the PGA Tour, and effectively LIV has existed to get the Saudi Arabian influence heavily into the PGA Tour. Its job may almost be done. Then they control the £1 billion purse strings. A few of the elements are thrown in, and maybe ultimately that was the goal in the first place. We just don't know. There's so much about the proper new deal, how it's going to work. Even now they've called it an agreement to an agreement. It's not actually a full agreement. And as you say, maybe the subcommittee may yet stop this after the 3-hour hearing yesterday. It's probably unlikely. It's possible. There's a hell of a lot to run in this one.
Do you know, there's so many caveats to it, isn't there, how golf's going to look moving forward. But the one thing I hope that doesn't come into play, I don't like the 54-hole format.
No.
72, you get, it's like tradition. You get the real winner at the end, don't you?
But
I think you're absolutely right. I think 72 means you can really test somebody to their true skills. You could probably keep it together for 54 and paper over the cracks a little more. Shotgun starts, I don't think, have been successful either. A couple of mates of mine went to the Hertfordshire event the other day and didn't really enjoy it. They said it was almost, I quote, like going to the zoo and watching animals, seeing kind of the likes of Bryson, DJ, Brooks playing in this event.
Explain what that means for people who haven't seen it. It means it happens all very fast and all at the same time.
Yes, exactly. So you don't have everybody teeing off the first or the first in the 10th. You have everybody starting on a different hole of the 18. So you've got no clear climax necessarily where the leaders are coming down the final hole together. Somebody might win it on the 12th and nobody's there. Somebody might win it over on the 4th. And you've got no real kind of focus for the crowd to kind of go to and watch either. So you've got great players all kind of buzzing around this course, and it's all a little bit flat, and it does lack the history, and perhaps, I'll be honest, it does lack the knowledge base of some of the fans who maybe went to something like the British Masters at the Belfry, where you don't get necessarily the bigger names, but you do get the history and the understanding and maybe a structure that still suits golf better. I don't know. Maybe there's room for both. And perhaps, again, moving forward, fan experience-wise, we could find a middle ground that does serve golf well. And ultimately, the best thing we can say maybe is if all of this is ironed out, we can get a better deal for the game and also for its fan base. And that is ultimately what we want.
I didn't have Russ down as a stuffy traditionalist, but there we are.
It's true though, isn't it? That's why the purists are so against this new
Absolutely,
format, and
yeah.
I'm with them.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Russ. Appreciate that.